If you're autistic, have you ever been called slow or even worse? Do you struggle to learn and understand new things? Have you been made to feel like you're not very smart, even though you have knowledge, abilities, and insight that most other people don't have? It's almost like you're extremely highly intelligent, but not, but you are, but not, but you are. Well, this is Hunter, and today I want to talk about autistic processing with you. I think people confuse processing styles and processing depth with intelligence. It has nothing to do with intelligence. I know personally that I can figure out anything and that I can do anything if I'm given enough time and if I'm given the right conditions. Now, I don't think the word slow, when you're talking about autistic processing, is appropriate or really accurate. I think instead of slow, words like wide and deep and thorough would be more accurate to describe how we autistic people process things. Let me see if I can give you an illustration that might help you to understand why I say that autistic people don't process things any more slowly than the average person. Okay, now picture this. One person has a really large bucket, and then they have a small bucket. And that small bucket is filled with water. And they're told to go over there and empty the contents of that small bucket, that one small bucket, into that large bucket. And it takes them about 2 seconds. Now, you've got another person that also has a large bucket, but they have several small buckets that are filled with water. And they're told to empty the contents of all those buckets into that large bucket. And it takes them, let's say they have 3 buckets, so it takes them 6 seconds. So 3 times as long as it took the other person to empty just the one bucket. Now, doing the math, they are going at the same speed as the other person per bucket. Lord, I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of making myself dizzy here, but what I'm getting at is when we autistic people are processing something, we're processing a whole bunch of things at once, a lot more than the average person. I know, like, for instance, if I have a task and there's sensory stuff going on around me, I can't filter it out. And so I've got to deal with that while I'm also trying to process my task. And I'm also trying to process and deal with all the thoughts running through my head that I can't just turn off, like you can turn off a light with a light switch. So to say that we're slow is not accurate. We process the same amount of information. We can process the same amount of information just as quickly as anybody else, but we don't process the same amount of information. We're processing a lot more information simultaneously, a lot more than the average person. Now, let me give you some examples of how my mind works and how it processes things, and see if you can relate. First of all, I'm not a real fast, slick speaker. I talk kind of slowly, and if you think the way I'm talking right now is slow, try to imagine if I didn't have a script or bullet points and I hadn't already practiced and thought about this for a long time before turning on the camera. And imagine if there wasn't the magic of editing. So that's one way it manifests itself. With these YouTube videos, I really have to practice and think about what I'm doing before I turn the camera on. But even then, I still make bloopers. And then on the other end of the room, they've got one of the... Lord, I hope this makes sense, what I was just talking about, because I'm dizzy now. But and I've come to the conclusion. See, I struggle with eye contact because I have to use minimal eye contact to help me to think about and focus on what I'm saying or what I'm trying to think of what to say, and also to be able to focus on what the other person is saying. It's probably unusual to non-autistic people to hear that it helps us autistic people to focus better on what they're saying if we're not looking them right in the eye. That's just too much sensory stimuli for me to do that, and also to have an intelligent conversation, and to always be sitting there thinking, am I doing this eye contact correctly or appropriately? And speaking of conversation and interactions, I much prefer written communication. I think I'm better at it. I'm okay talking to somebody one-on-one to some degree, but with written communication, it allows me to really take my time, go at my own pace and my own schedule, and also to do any editing before I send it. And I'm not seeing the other person sitting there twiddling their thumbs, getting impatient with me, like you can if you're doing a face-to-face conversation. And sometimes, when you're talking face-to-face, you can, once you spit it out, it's out there and it can't be taken back. Now, with written communication, you can edit and delete and add things before you hit send. And I know, like, there have been some emails where I've deleted entire paragraphs, and sometimes I never even ended up sending the email. So I like written communication because it allows me more processing time. And in this day and age, I wish all the people who insist on talking on the phone instead of sending a message, I wish they would learn and come on into the 21st century. This is coming from a guy who still has a flip phone. Group conversations are tough for me because I can't keep up. By the time I've processed what other people have said about a certain subject and I'm ready to interject, they've already moved on to the next subject. And that's kind of related to this next thing. I like to watch movies with closed captioning turned on. Now, I have very good hearing, so it has nothing to do with my hearing. I just can't keep up sometimes with what's happening or with the dialogue unless I have the closed captioning turned on, because I'm focusing and processing so much of the visuals that by the time my mind is trying to get over to the dialogue, it's already moved on. And what about verbal instructions or directions? Lord, I'm glad we have GPS technology nowadays. See, I'm a guy and I'm autistic, so I ain't ever going to ask for directions. So I'm glad we don't really have to anymore. And if you're going to try to give me spoken instructions, forget about it, because I'm going to forget about it unless it's written down. And this I think that's why games confuse me. I'm not really good at games. Everybody else is just having a good old time while I'm sitting there all confused, So can we kind of do away with the Yahtzee, nix the Parcheesi, flipping the mousetrap, card games? And then there's something called delayed processing. Where it looks like it's delayed because the amount of time that it takes me to fully have a reactive feeling to something that happened. Sometimes I can feel kind of crummy one day and I don't really know why, and then I think, well, maybe it's the accumulation of stuff that's happened over the last couple of months, and I'm just now feeling, and I feel feelings like sometimes I feel anger or joy at something that happened a while back, and I didn't feel it at the time of the event. And it takes me a long time to read because I'm really trying to completely absorb the information and what was written and to truly, completely understand it, comprehend it. I will go back and reread sentences and paragraphs and to try to pick up maybe something that I didn't the first time I read it. So as you can imagine, trying to study in school and college was torture for me because not only do I have to reread and things that I'm interested in, but imagine if it's something that I'm not interested in, having to reread it and reread it and reread it because I'm really not interested in it, so it's hard for me to understand it. So I was exhausted and it felt like torture trying to study. And Lord knows I can't multitask, or what people consider multitasking. Now, it does seem like my brain, on the inside, my brain is multitasking, but as far as doing multiple activities or projects at once, no way. And I'm also not spontaneous because spontaneity does not allow for any processing time. And I like routine. And I think the reason we autistic people like routine is because routines are things we've done before. So we've already processed them. So the activities that we do in routines are pre-processed. And I can get overloaded. Now, I think some people might have the impression that autistic people get overloaded easily, that it doesn't take much to overload them. Let me set the record straight on that too. No, it takes a lot to overload us. What people don't know is that we are already loaded up with so many things that when this other thing happens on the outside that somebody might not consider a big deal, well, we've already been loaded up. Our heads are loaded up, and our physiology is already loaded up with dealing with all kinds of other things already. So then you add something on top of that, we get overloaded. I really hope that makes sense. And I'm not a big fan of traveling. I've done a lot of it, and I know I'm going to be doing more of it sometime. But traveling just involves one transition after another, and one new thing after another. And I know, like, by the time I get to a new place, usually I'm pretty worn out because of all the transitions of the actual traveling. But then once you get to your destination, then by the time I've processed the new destination and gotten used to it, it's time to go home. So I usually don't get to enjoy trips and things like that as much as I would like. And I don't like to be rushed at all because I like to take my time, look at every angle, think about things, roll them over in my head. And with any kind of project, I want to do it to the best of my ability, and I also want to do it right, and I want to consider every angle, and I want to be thorough. Now, that leaves me disappointed a lot of the time because what I have to do is sometimes I have to kind of rush and go ahead and wrap things up much sooner than I would like because I just don't have the time to do it to the level that I would like, or somebody who is waiting on me may not have that kind of time. So I end up being dissatisfied because I know I could have done better. And I end up exhausted too because I am so thorough. I can't just do something halfway. So it kind of discourages me from taking on new projects because I'm not sure if I'm up to that hyper level of commitment, and I'm not sure if I'm up to being both exhausted and disappointed. Now, sometimes I wish all this were different, but my gosh, I've been dealing with this for so long, you know. But there are a lot of good things, you know. I wouldn't change my mind and how it works for anything. And I wish there were more people like you and me. Now, you know how I mentioned earlier that I can't filter things out, and then I notice things. Like this is something I forgot to mention, but I can walk into a room and I can see if an object has been moved, no matter how small the object and no matter how slightly it's been moved. So I notice details like crazy, and patterns, of course. So when you translate that into listening to music or looking at art, looking at a painting, man, it's quite an experience because, you know, I notice every little nuance, you know, and with the music, every instrument, every sound, and I take in the melody and the harmony and the rhythm and the tempo and the feeling behind the music. And with paintings, you know, I notice all the visual things going on, and of course I love to go up and touch paintings because I love the texture. So to me, art and music and all that is a much richer experience than it is for the average person. And like a couple of days ago, it was about 18 degrees Fahrenheit here, and there was snow on the ground. I had to go out and work on my truck just a little bit, and I just took it all in. I love snow. It makes things quiet, it slows things down, and I like colder weather because it gives me energy. Hot weather saps my energy. And then all the nature things going around me. You know, there's birds in this area, and I see a lot of deer. But anyway, so I was just taking it all in, and it was wonderful. And there was no cost involved. It was free. And that's another thing. I enjoy and appreciate nature, I think, a lot more than the average person. When I'm out in nature, and I mean truly out in nature, I'm glad that I can't filter things out because I notice all these wonderful things, sounds and sights and feelings and everything. And you know how I mentioned that we have delayed processing, or maybe that we keep things with us for a long time. This can be an advantage when those feelings are the result of something positive. Let me give you an example. I had a Zoom call with my good friend, Sienna, and it gave me so much joy, and it just made me so happy. And I still feel that joy, even though it's months later. So it's like the gift that keeps giving. So that's an advantage of being a long, deep, or thorough processor. But let me repeat, you are highly intelligent, and your processing style hardly makes you unintelligent. In fact, I think just the opposite. And you should value your brain. I value your brain. I wish more people had minds like yours. Autistic people are highly intelligent, sensitive, deep, and thorough people. And that's a good thing. Never forget how smart, talented, unique, and special you are. Always carry that with you. Well, I sure enjoyed talking with you today. I'll talk with you again real soon, and I hope you have the best day ever. Lord, I hope this makes sense, what I was just talking about, because I'm dizzy now. But